The ruins of the outer city stretched out in a jagged maze of crumbling concrete and rusted steel. Shadows clung to the ruins like old scars, concealing dangers both known and unknown. Kade led the trio, his power armor humming softly with every step, its servos adjusting to the uneven terrain. The faint blue glow of his HUD reflected on his hardened face as he scanned the rubble for movement. He raised a gauntleted hand, signaling a halt. "Be careful," he muttered, his voice gravelly over the comms. "This area's got scavenger traffic written all over it." Behind him, Jansen adjusted his heavy rifle, his armored figure casting a long shadow over the rubble. "Let them try," he said evenly, his tone carrying the quiet confidence of a seasoned soldier. Dr. Martel brought up the rear, her powered exoskeleton hissing with every step. The suit wasn't as seamless as the power armor Kade and Jansen wore. It lacked the fluidity of years-tested engineering. She winced as the hard frame pressed against a fresh bruise on her ribcage, a souvenir from her last training session. "Remind me again," Martel said, her voice strained but determined. "Why couldn't I just analyze this ship remotely?" Kade didn't look back. "Because the last time we left something valuable out here, it ended up in Medina's hands. You're here to make sure that doesn't happen again." Martel sighed, gripping the analysis tools strapped to her chest rig. She wasn't a soldier, and the exoskeleton felt more like a cage than an advantage. But she'd trained for this. Long days in the simpods, hours fighting Kade and Jansen, bruises notwithstanding, and she wasn't about to let them see her struggle. The group moved in silence for the next few blocks, their footsteps crunching softly against broken asphalt. The ruined city rose around them like jagged teeth, skyscrapers stripped to their steel skeletons. Faint graffiti on the walls warned scavengers to keep out, marked with symbols that belonged to Medina's gang. Kade stopped abruptly, raising a fist. His HUD blinked with an alert. "Drone intel was right. We're not alone out here," he said. Jansen raised his rifle, scanning the debris-strewn road ahead. "Scavengers?" "Not yet," Kade replied, "but I don't trust a city this quiet." Martel's heart thudded in her chest as she adjusted the harness inside her exoskeleton. "How far is the site?" she asked. "Another 5 blocks, Kade said. "Stay close. We keep moving." The trio advanced cautiously, their route weaving between collapsed buildings and derelict vehicles. The air was heavy with the metallic tang of rust and the faint stench of stagnant water. Martel's suit HUD chimed softly, feeding her telemetry data on the area's atmospheric conditions. She glanced nervously at the ruined skyline, imagining what kind of scavengers might already be on their trail. As they neared the target site, a faint, rhythmic sound reached them. A low, melodic hum carried on the wind. It wasn't mechanical, nor did it seem natural. It prickled the edges of Martel's senses. And she wasn't alone. "You hear that?" Jansen asked, his voice low. "Yeah," Kade replied, scanning the area. "Could be wind through the ruins, or something worse." Martel's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the controls on her exosuit. The tension was palpable, the sense of unseen eyes watching from the shadows. "Eyes up, weapons ready," Kade ordered. "Whatever it is, we'll deal with it. We just need to get to that ship." The faint hum grew louder as they approached the crash site. The team passed a crumbling archway that led into a sunken section of the city. The frigate lay embedded into the remains of a shattered building, its hull jagged and weathered by years of exposure. "There," Kade said, pointing toward the ship. It was a small, sleek, pre-war craft, partially hidden beneath the rubble. The design was unmistakably military, its once pristine plating now scorched and pitted. Time had claimed most of its exterior, leaving it nearly indistinguishable from the ruins around it. "You'd have to know it was here to even find it," Jansen said, lowering his weapon slightly. Kade nodded. "Exactly why we're here. Let's move. Martel, get ready to analyze that black box." As the trio approached the ship, the melodic hum faded, replaced by an uneasy silence. Martel felt her skin prickle, her instincts screaming that something wasn't right. Kay, she began, her voice shaky. I know, he said. A jagged breach near its midsection provided an improvised entry point. The metal peeled back, like the skin of a wounded beast. Looks like our way in, Kade said, gesturing toward the breach. Jansen nodded, stepping ahead to secure the perimeter. No signs of scavengers. Either we got lucky or they're already inside. Martel hesitated, staring at the ship. Even with the exoskeleton amplifying her strength, she felt small and vulnerable next to its looming presence. This thing looks ancient, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Because it is, Kade replied. Let's move. Clock's ticking. The trio entered the ship, their boots crunching against shattered glass and twisted debris. The corridors were dark and eerily silent, the air thick with the scent of scorched metal and something faintly sweet, like decaying fruit. Kade's helmet lamp illuminated the warped interior, the walls streaked with scorch marks and jagged gashes. Careful, Kade warned. This place is a tomb. Don't touch anything unless you have to. Martel trailed behind, her exoskeleton making her movements clunky and loud in the confined space. She winced as the frame pressed against her bruised ribs, but she kept moving, clutching the data retrieval unit tightly. The tilted corridors made navigation treacherous. Every surface was at an angle, forcing them to climb over debris or brace themselves against the walls to keep their balance. Is that writing? Martel asked, pausing to examine the markings. Looks like it, Jansen said, his tone grim. Doesn't mean anything good. Probably gang stuff. Kade turned back to her. Keep moving. We're not here to sightsee. As they advanced deeper into the ship, the trio split their focus. Kade and Jansen scanned every shadow, their weapons at the ready, while Martel set up her equipment near what appeared to be the ship's central command console. Martel went to work, struggling to connect her equipment to the console. The interface was old, almost alien, its controls unintuitive and unresponsive. Her exoskeleton didn't make things easier, the bulky frame making precise movements a chore. Come on, she hissed, sweat dripping down her temple as she worked. You good back there? Kade asked, glancing over his shoulder. I'm fine, she snapped, more out of frustration than anger. Just give me a minute. Jansen chuckled softly. Take your time, Doc. Not like we're standing in the middle of a scavenger hotspot or anything. Martel ignored him, focusing on the task at hand. The black box's encrypted data began to trickle through her equipment, but the process was agonizingly slow. I'm getting something, she said finally. This thing has been here a long time. The logs are corrupted, but I think... She froze as a new set of alerts flashed across her screen. Wait. The nuclear drive. It's not here. What do you mean, not here? Kade demanded, stepping closer. Martel pointed to the console. The ship's systems show it was ripped out. See these readings? There's coolant leakage and radiation traces, but the drive itself is gone. Jansen swore under his breath. Scavengers? Martel shook her head, her expression grim. No. Look at this. She gestured to the floor near the console. Claw-like marks gouged deep into the metal, their precision unnatural and deliberate. Whistlers, Kade said, his voice low. Jansen's grip on his rifle tightened. That explains the tunnel. Martel followed his gaze. At the far end of the chamber, the floor gave way to a gaping hole, its edges jagged and uneven. The tunnel stretched downward, disappearing into the darkness below. This wasn't in the drone's report, Kade said, his tone sharp. Maybe it's recent, Martel replied, her voice shaking slightly. The trio stood in tense silence, the air thick with the realization of what they'd stumbled into. Pack it up, Kade ordered. We're leaving, now. Martel scrambled to disconnect her equipment as Jansen and Kade kept their weapons trained on the tunnel. Kade and Jansen kept watch nearby, their armored forms blending into the twisted metal of the ship's dim interior. Then the sound came, a faint shuffle, the crunch of debris underfoot. Kade raised a fist, signaling silence. Jansen's visor glinted as he scanned the corridor with his weapon raised. Martel froze, her fingers hovering over the controls. The faint, hushed voices of multiple people echoed down the hall. And then came the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. Kate muttered into the comm, "We're not alone." A group of figures emerged from the shadows, their faces half hidden beneath makeshift masks. The Medina gang. They moved with unnatural confidence, their glowing veins pulsing faintly beneath their skin, a sure sign of luster coursing through their systems. Their leader, a wiry man with a jagged scar down his cheek, stepped forward, his shotgun trained on Kade. "Well, well," the man sneered. "Looks like we've got ourselves some corporate dogs sniffing where they don't belong." "We're not looking for trouble," Kade replied coolly, his hand tightening on his rifle. "Turn around and walk away." The gang leader's grin widened, feral and unnerving. "See, that's the thing. You've already found trouble. Now hand over whatever tech you've got, or we'll take it off your corpses." Jansen let out a low growl. "Your call, Kade." "Open fire," Kade ordered, his tone cold as ice. The Medina gang opened fire, their weapons blazing in the narrow confines of the wreck. Jansen stepped forward, his heavy weapon roaring to life. The sheer force of his burst turned the corridor into a kill zone, scattering debris and forcing the scavengers to take cover. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off the metal walls, and the air grew thick with smoke. "Keep them bottled up," Kade barked, moving to flank the scavengers. His power armor moved with fluid precision, the servos humming softly as he darted through the maze-like corridors. He launched a grenade down an adjacent passage, the explosion rocking the ship and sending several gang members sprawling. Meanwhile, Martel ducked behind a console, clutching a compact pistol in trembling hands. Her exoskeleton's enhanced strength made her a formidable presence, but she was no soldier. She peeked around the edge of her cover, her breath hitching as one of the gang members broke through Jansen's suppressive fire and charged her position. The man's eyes were wild, his movements erratic but unnervingly fast. Martel fired, the shot grazing his shoulder, but he didn't stop. With a guttural yell, he lunged at her. Martel screamed, raising her arms just in time to catch him. The exoskeleton's servos whined as she pushed back, slamming him against the wall. The impact stunned him long enough for her to grab a nearby piece of debris and bash him across the head, sending him crumpling to the floor. "Martel, you good?" Jansen's voice crackled in her comm. "Barely," she gasped, her voice shaky but determined. "Keep them off me." Jansen held the corridor, his bursts controlled and accurate. The gang was relentless, their movements erratic yet coordinated, their aggression amplified by the luster. Even as Jansen mowed down one after another, more kept coming. Kade, meanwhile, moved like a shadow through the wreckage. He caught the gang leader off guard, grabbing him from behind and slamming him into the wall. The shotgun clattered to the ground, and Kade wasted no time, delivering a sharp blow to the man's temple with his armored fist. The leader crumpled, unconscious. The gang's reinforcements were already flooding the ship. Kade's HUD flagged multiple heat signatures converging on their location, and the distant shouts of more scavengers confirmed the grim reality. They were outnumbered. "Time to go," Kade ordered, grabbing the unconscious gang leader's shotgun for good measure. He motioned for Martel to fall back. Jansen's weapon overheated with a loud whine, forcing him to switch to his sidearm as he fell back toward the group. "We're not going to hold them much longer, Kade." The gang pushed forward, their manic energy driving them to near-suicidal bravery. Kade pulled a remote detonator from his belt and tossed a small charge onto a weakened support beam. "Get clear," he shouted. The charge detonated, collapsing a section of the corridor and cutting off the majority of the gang. The wreck groaned in protest, the walls trembling as debris rained down. The team used the chaos to retreat, emerging into the ruins outside. But the gang wasn't giving up. Shouts and footsteps echoed behind them as scavengers poured out of the wreck, their glowing veins visible even in the dim light. "We need to move," Martel yelled, her exoskeleton whirring as she struggled to keep up with the others. Kade fired over his shoulder as they sprinted through the ruins. The gang was relentless. their pursuit as much a testament to their desperation as to the madness induced by luster. The trio finally reached a narrow passageway, too tight for the gang's numbers to follow easily. Kade tossed another charge, collapsing the entrance behind them and sealing off their pursuers. Breathing hard, the team paused to regroup, their armor battered and their nerves frayed. "Is it always like this?" Martel asked, her voice shaky as she leaned against a wall. Kade glanced at her, his expression unreadable behind his visor. "You'll get used to it." Jansen chuckled darkly, reloading his weapon. "Welcome to the spine, Doc." The air in the tunnel was thick with the acrid stench of spent ammunition and scorched metal. The trio moved slowly, their footsteps splashing in shallow puddles left from the earlier flooding. Martel's exoskeleton hissed with each strained movement, its servos groaning under the weight of her fatigue. Kade led the group, his power armor dented, the edges of his blade still slick with scavenger blood. Jansen followed close behind, his rifle held low, its barrel blackened from overuse. "Medina's people won't be coming back any time soon," Jansen muttered, his voice a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Not after the beating we just gave them." Kade didn't reply. His eyes scanned every shadow, his instincts still razor-sharp despite the battle's end. The eerie glow of luster still lingered in his mind, the manic intensity of their enemies, unnerving even for someone as hardened as him. Martel trailed behind, clutching the black box tightly against her chest. Her hands trembled, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of the data it contained. The truth was close, she could feel it, and it scared her more than the scavengers ever could. The trio finally reached a small maintenance alcove, a brief respite from the tension of the ruins. Martel dropped to her knees, her exoskeleton locking in place to support her weight. She plugged the black box into her portable analyzer, her fingers fumbling with the cables. "Make it quick, Doc," Kade urged, his voice low and urgent. "We're not out of danger yet." The device hummed to life, its screen flashing as it decrypted the black box's data. Lines of corrupted code scrolled past before resolving into coherent logs. Martel's eyes widened as she read through the records. "This ship," she began, her voice faltering, "it didn't crash because of an accident or the war. It was targeted." "Targeted by what?" Jansen asked, stepping closer, his helmet light illuminating her pale face. Martel swallowed hard. "The Whistlers, they brought it down." The ship's drive logs show erratic energy readings before the crash, consistent with Whistler activity. They tunneled into the ship, breached its systems, and disconnected the nuclear drive. The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Kade crossed his arms, his face grim. "That ship's been here for over 2 decades. You're telling me those things have been in the spine all this time, hiding right under our feet?" Martel nodded, her voice trembling. "They're not just scavengers or insects, they're deliberate, coordinated. They knew exactly what they were doing." The realization hit them like a physical blow. The nuclear drive wasn't just a random theft, it was part of something bigger, something the trio couldn't yet comprehend. "They've been feeding off the city's infrastructure," Martel continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "The energy, the coolant systems, it's all connected. This isn't just survival, it's strategy." Jansen exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You're saying they're planning something? What, to take over the spine? The whole planet?" "I don't know," Martel admitted, her hands gripping the analyzer tightly. "But if they've had 20 years to prepare, we might already be too late." Kade stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. His voice was steady, reassuring despite the grim news. "We're not too late. Not yet. We've got this data. We know they're here. That's more than anyone else has had in 20 years. The trio gathered their gear, their minds heavy with the implications of their discovery. They had completed their mission, but it felt like only the beginning of something far more dangerous. "Let's move," Kade said, his voice cutting through the tension. "We need to get back to base and report this. That tunnel, He gestured to the dark opening they had left behind. "It's going to need a full team to investigate." As they limped back through the ruins, the city's eerie silence seemed louder than ever. The glow of their armor lights cast long, distorted shadows on the broken walls, a haunting reminder of what they had faced. Martel clutched the black box tightly, her thoughts racing. The data was damning, a ticking time bomb of truth that could change everything. The Whistlers weren't just a threat. They were an enemy, patient and methodical, biding their time. The trio finally reached their staging area, their armor battered, their bodies bruised, but their resolve unbroken. As they awaited extraction, Martel stared at the horizon, where the remnants of the spine loomed against the night sky. "We're not ready for this," she murmured. Kade overheard her, his expression unreadable beneath his helmet. "We'll have to be,"